Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jake Costanzo, and I'm the energy analyst here at People's Company. On today's webinar, we're going to go ahead and talk about wind turbine decommissioning. And, before we jump in, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background about People's Company. People's Company leads the nation in providing integrated land solutions as one of the few firms specializing in land brokerage, appraisal, land and energy management, crop insurance, capital markets, and corporate services. We provide a one-stop solution for agricultural transactions across the United States, delivering personalized land services in every major agricultural market. Our local land professionals are experienced in working with landowners, farmers, institutional investors, and family offices to achieve best possible outcomes. So jumping back to our webinar topic for today, we're going to be talking about wind turbine decommissioning, which is something that's becoming more and more prevalent in recent years. Many projects that were built back in the mid to early 2000s are reaching the end of their useful life, and the ones that can't be repowered are needing to be taken down. So back in late 2024, People's Company, Capstone Partners, Central Surplus, and Faegre Drinker all collaborated on the sale and decommissioning of a central Iowa wind project. And during that project, it was determined that two of those turbines would need to be decommissioned. So from that process, we got an up-close look at what happens when these wind turbines reach the end of their useful life. So today we'll be talking about the entire decommissioning process, all in the context of that project. We'll cover everything from how operators decide when it's time to decommission to the permitting and preparation, all the way to the actual tearing down of the turbines. So whether you're a landowner with a turbine on your property, or maybe you're considering a wind lease, or you're a project operator weighing your options, we hope you'll get some valuable insights here today. So with that, we have an excellent panel of guests here. We have Jack Bradley with Capstone Partners, Reid Loftsgard with Faegre Drinker, Biddle, and Reath, and Jeremy White with Central Surplus. So real quick, would you guys mind go ahead and introduce yourselves and tell us a little about your companies?
Sure. So I'm Jack Bradley, Managing Director at Capstone Partners. We are a middle market investment bank, and my expertise is focused on 35 plus years of experience in restructuring, bankruptcy, and M&A transactions, and have worked on a number of renewable energy projects.
Yeah, and I can jump in. My name is Reid Loftsgard. I'm an associate here at Faegre Drinker, Biddle and Reath. We're a large law firm, but we have an office here in Des Moines, and that's where I'm located. I primarily practice corporate law, mostly in the M&A space, but just kind of by virtue of where we are, and Des Moines kind of being a renewable energy hub of sorts. I've gotten to develop some experience in the energy regulatory space, worked on wind, solar projects, as well as ethanol and pipeline projects.
Hi, I'm Jeremy White. I'm project manager with Central Surplus. We're a demolition company that's been in business for over 30 years. In the last decade, we've specialized in mostly in the wind industry. We've done full decommissioning of farms and anything you can think of dealing with the wind industry. We're based out of Alabama, but we operate nationwide.
Nice, thanks, guys. So yeah, to kick things off, Jack, why don't we start with you? Could you tell us a little about how you got involved with this decommissioning project here in Central Iowa, and kind of walk us through all that?
Sure. So Capstone was originally introduced to this project, I think going back to maybe the spring of 2024. One of the restructuring partners in Faegre Drinker's Wilmington office had introduced us to the company, which was a Chinese-based company called HZ Windpower. And the strategic challenge HZ Windpower was facing is they had decided that they were going to exit the U.S. market. And the challenge they faced is what's the most cost-effective way for them to exit the market. So we work with them through much of 2024, helping them look at various alternatives, including bankruptcy, and ultimately determined that the best case outcome for them that met all of their objectives would be an assignment for the benefit of creditors. That gave them the ability to no longer be involved after the assignment for the benefit of creditors, and then was a very cost-effective way for them to then exit the U.S. market. So the assignment for the benefit of creditors is somewhat akin to a bankruptcy filing, but without a lot of the administrative overhead and cost of a bankruptcy. And in effect, what happens is that all of the assets of HZ Windpower were transferred to a new entity called HZWP Assinee. I was appointed as the assignee and then oversaw the liquidation of the properties through both the sale and the decommissioning over the subsequent 18 months.
Okay, nice. And could you kind of walk through sort of the step by step of, what that actually looks like, when a foreign company like that, you know, kind of packs up and what sort of happens on your end of things?
Yeah, so once HZ had accepted the idea of an assignment for the benefit of creditors, we really worked with them to then come up with the information that we needed to affect the ABC. And that was really identifying a list of creditors who needed to get paid, and then also coming up with what we'll call the closing balance sheet to identify the assets, both tangible and intangible, that would then be transferred to the assignee entity.
Okay, nice. And I'm curious too, what happens to the landowner's leases when this happens? Are those leases voided or did they stop receiving payments at some point?
Well, it's a couple of step process. So the leases stay in place. Um, there are obligations that need to be dealt with as part of the ABC process. Um, in this case, all of the landowners received their lease payments during the pendency or the tenure of the ABC. And for the property that we ended up decommissioning for, uh, the leaseholder on that property and the assignee, we then mutually agreed to terminate that lease and exchange mutual releases. And then that was then recorded in the local real estate records or real estate register. And then that property then was just returned back to its, pre-wind turbine state.
Gotcha. And then, a lot of times with these wind leases, there's decommissioning bonds or securities in place. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what the case was for this scenario?
Yeah, sure. So oftentimes lease agreements, or particularly the vintage of the lease agreements that we were dealing with here back to 2015 and 2016, have provisions for sinking funds or performance bonds. I think in this case, the performance bond, there was a sinking fund requirement, not a performance bond, but that did not kick in until 10 years into the project life, which would have been sometime the middle of this year. Um, and that left the challenge of how we were going to pay for the decommissioning if that ended up being the outcome. We were fortunate working with People's Company and Faegre to be able to sell the entities that owned 11 of the 13 turbines across 5 different locations. Those leases then were part of the entities that we sold and were effectively transferred then to the new owners. So those stayed in place. And then we were just left with the residual entity that held ownership in the 2 turbines in Nevada County that we ended up decommissioning.
Okay, so you're able to use some residual funds that were in there. How did this project qualify for any tax credits, and did that factor into funding the decommission at all?
Indirectly, it did. So the background on the tax credits is that there were Iowa state production tax credits, which we work with Reid and his team on to make the appropriate filings during the ABC to obtain the production tax credits from the state of Iowa. And then we're able, because there's a pretty active market for production tax credits at the state level, to be able to then sell those, monetize those credits and use those proceeds to be funding the operation of the S&E during the period when we were managing the company. Those will stay in place going forward for anybody using production tax credits in Iowa. The federal situation is a little murkier. We discovered during our diligence that the prior owners, being a Chinese-based company, were reluctant to file for any federal tax credits because of concerns about the eligibility that they, as a Chinese national company, had to obtain the credits. The S&E, the assignment for the benefit of creditors, solved that problem structurally because the ABC is actually a U.S. entity. So we were then able to file for federal production tax credits, and were then able to monetize those. And through working with Reid and his tax team at Faegre Drinker, we're able to then identify buyers for the federal tax credits, and those funds, in part, um, help pay for the decommissioning.
Gotcha. Then, kind of bigger picture on the tax credits. I know with the passing of OB3 last summer, with those federal tax credits going away, how do you kind of see those affecting future decommissionings? Is that gonna, play a factor in funding some of these?
It will in a couple of different ways. So the details of the big beautiful bill, as it's referred to, were that the production credits at the federal level will go away unless the property, unless the project um, is completed by the end of 2027. But there's also an interim cutoff date that work has to have been started by July 4th of this year for that to happen. Um, So that's kind of the present environment for tax credits. The other issue that I think that creates is that for people looking at a repowering option and they're not able to make that interim deadline of July 4th of 26, they may find themselves in a situation where the repowering economics are not going to work, and that could then lead to additional decommissionings.
Fascinating. And from these turbines that were sold, four of them sold, and I believe all four, maybe three of four, being repowered. Why is it that these two needed to be decommissioned?
Well, shortly before we were about to close the sale of all of the turbines, including the last two in Nevada, we had a mechanical breakdown. And because the equipment was unique to this particular company, they'd been manufactured by a Chinese company. They had left the market, as I said, and there was really no replacement parts available. So we initially thought that there was a software fix that we could use. But that software fix, while that was successful, the mechanical breakdown could not be repaired because of the lack of equipment. Coincidental to that, and for reasons that were never fully explained to us, Story County, who had the permitting authority, unilaterally revoked the conditional use permit, which was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back and made us decide that we needed to pursue the decommissioning route simply because we were also concerned that even if we were somehow able to repair the two turbines, probably the conditions in terms of a new conditional use permit would have been prohibitive and would have meant that we go back to the decommissioning alternative.
Okay, very nice. And then was there any cost to the landowner along the way during this decommissioning process?
No, there was no cost to the landowner. We worked very closely with the landowner um, and wanted to make sure that there was clear and transparent communication about what needed to happen, the timing of when that was going to happen. And one of the challenges we had that we're able to successfully address is that when we made the decision to decommission these two turbines, it was right at the beginning of the growing season or potential uh, leading up to the growing season. So we really worked closely with the landowner who had a tenant farmer on the property to make sure that they understood we were going to be doing everything that we could um, and that to make sure that all of this work of taking the turbines down and then uh, removing the road that we had put in through the property as part of the lease terms had been removed, and we were had a couple of setbacks, but were able to move the property back to its agricultural state by mid-April of last year.
Gotcha. No, and if I remember correctly, yeah, that farm was able to be fully planted, like the turbine had never been there.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks, Jack. I want to go ahead and jump over to Reid. Can you tell us a little bit about how Faegre Drinker was involved in this?
Yeah, sure, Jake. Kind of piggybacking on what Jack said, we had a colleague in our Delaware office who kind of kicked this whole ABC process off, and I think pretty quickly there was a recognition that they were going to need some help with an eventual transaction, involving these wind turbines. And myself and a partner here in the Des Moines office, Andy Anderson, we've, like I said, we have experience with these sorts of transactions, and kind of, also kind of navigating kind of the patchwork regulatory environment as well. So that's kind of how we were brought in. And once we were brought in, I hope Jack would agree, but our goal was to kind of provide full service legal support, helping Capstone first kind of figure out what exactly was in the estate, what was actually assigned. The record keeping was left something to be desired, so that was kind of an initial work of making sure they had crossed all their T's, dotted their I's as far as land rights, PPAs, interconnection agreements, just kind of making sure that all the infrastructure was there. And then once we kind of handled that initial work, it was helping Jack work to keep these operational and in compliance with regulatory requirements, and then eventually helping with the sale and the decommissioning on the back end.
Nice. And I think, during the auction process or sealed bid auction process, you guys had brought a few buyers into the mix. Can you kind of talk a little bit about, the types of folks you work with that would have interest in these projects and kind of why they would be interested in acquiring them?
Yeah, so we represent and have relationships with developers, operators, lenders who work in this space. So we kind of sent out a broad ask and just to see if anyone was interested, kind of with the thought that it's a unique situation. It's going to need, there probably aren't a ton of buyers out there who this would kind of be in their sweet spot for their their overall portfolio. So just wanted to get it out to as many folks as we do, and see if there were any bites. But yeah, that's kind of developers, operators, lenders, just kind of see if anyone was interested or knew of anyone who was interested.
Nice. Yeah. And I think you were involved a little bit with the state level tax credits. Can you kind of talk about, what the process looked like for claiming those and anything along those lines?
Yeah. So yeah, like Jack said, I think out of the 13 turbines, I want to say maybe 7 of the turbines were actually eligible for the tax credits, and that's more a product of when the turbines were constructed. I think the program that we were under, I think that the requirement was that construction had to be complete by the end of 2017, and the turbines, in this project were kind of completed at various times, and also I think kind of to Jack's point of as far as the federal tax credits, maybe some hesitation with applying for those. I think maybe some of that same thinking went into the state level tax credits just because only half of them actually received authority to qualify for the tax credits. But yeah, we helped Jack submit all the required information to the state, obtain the tax credits, and then send them out to working with a broker, send them out to sale.
Nice. And then I know with federal taxes or tax credits going away, are state level tax credits, still going to be around, or is it a similar situation for those?
So I think it's the case that if you currently are eligible for state level tax credits, which again means that your turbines were constructed, prior to 2018. I don't think there's I think that program will continue until it sunsets maybe in 2028. I can't
Gotcha.
remember the exact date, but I think it's a 10-year runway for when you can actually apply for the tax credits. So I don't think there's any jeopardy of those existing tax credits going away. I think it's more of I don't know if there will be a new program that's started that will allow more recently constructed turbines or new developments to participate in any sort of tax credit program. Kind of similarly to tax credits, there is a property kind of a special valuation property tax structure in Iowa. It's done at the county level, but there's a state code that prescribes the structure that counties can adopt, and that's a tax advantage that new developed turbines can participate in, assuming that the county that they're building in has adopted that ordinance. But yeah, as far as true state tax credits, it's kind of you're in or you aren't.
Gotcha. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Can you kind of talk a little bit about some of the county restrictions and permitting you had to work through?
Yeah, and so as people on this call might know, county restrictions are restrictions at large are primarily at the county level. And so when we were working on this project, we had turbines in I think four different counties. So there was kind of that work of identifying each ordinance in each county and seeing what was the same, what was different. There is uniformity, but each county kind of does things a little differently, and some go into a lot of detail on what they want from wind turbines in their county, and some don't. So that's kind of a challenge that you need to work through. But as far as the permitting and restrictions specific to the decommissioning, the Story County ordinance, it did prescribe some requirements for the decommissioning. I think one requirement was everything had to be taken out at least 4 feet below ground level. And then kind of like what you talked about with Jack, there was also the requirement of a decommissioning bond to be put up, and a decommissioning plan to be approved by the county. As far as we could tell, based on our records, those items were never provided to the county, never approved, which kind of like what Jack was saying, led to some questions of how this was going to get paid for. So you can look at what the county says they want done, but kind of at the end of the day, it's what actually gets done, and what the county is actually enforcing is can be another thing. I guess just for the permitting, Jeremy's team did most of that, and did a great job. There was kind of one grading permit requirement that required some back and forth with the county, that we were able to work it out kind of with the idea that everyone had the same goal of getting the decommissioning done and completed prior to the planting season. And there was some concern on our end that this grading permit would kind of push that timeline back. So we were able to, explain to the county kind of what the process was going to look like, why a grading permit was not needed, and able to kind of educate them on, the decommissioning process as a whole, and get them, to kind of agree with what we were thinking.
Gotcha. And that kind of, leads into my next question here. What sort of, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what other obstacles did you run into when working with the county? And were there any ways you kind of were able to remedy those?
Yeah. And we did have some hurdles with, while working with the county. Jack mentioned one with, them just kind of pulling our permit at, the 11th hour. I think part of it is just that this is, decommissioning. It's not new, but it is something that's, a lot of counties probably haven't dealt with before. So it's new to them. And so I think, part of our job ended up being, kind of educating the county on the process. Jeremy's team did that as well. Meeting with their engineers and making sure that everyone was on the same page as far as kind of what the process looked like. Decommissionings are very public, and so the county has a lot of interest in making sure they go well. And so we had to kind of be extra careful about including them in conversations about how the decommissioning was going to go. And just kind of, addressing any concerns that they had.
Absolutely. And I know property taxes can kind of get increased sometimes when there's a turbine built on these properties. Have you seen any issues, with property taxes remaining high after this turbine's gone and there's no longer that income from the wind lease?
Yeah, and so I guess my understanding is that the property taxes that are assessed on the land itself shouldn't go up if a turbine is built. But the county can assess the actual turbine property, and extract property taxes from the turbine. And like I mentioned with that special valuation, that's something that I've seen in a lot of counties that they've adopted that special valuation that I think defers any property tax on the turbine, I think for the first year, and then it kind of ramps up by 5% until the fifth year. And then from then on, it's taxed at its full value. So it provides a good incentive to construct turbines in that county. And it's a if you're a developer, it's a great tool that you can use. One downside that we found is that that special valuation ordinance doesn't really contemplate what happens when the turbine is no longer there after the decommissioning. And so one thing that we had to work through with the county was, because the county, I think the county assessor was simply looking at the property tax schedule that the turbine was being taxed pursuant to, and was saying, hey, it's you're in your eighth year, you pay full property tax value on this turbine, and we had to again kind of educate him that our argument was essentially that once the turbine is no longer there, it's no longer subject to that special valuation schedule, and so should kind of be taxed as typical property. And when typical property is no longer there, it's no longer taxed. So we were able to get the county kind of on our side there. But that's something that again, this decommissioning is a newer thing, and it's going to be happening more, obviously. But there's still some regulatory kinks that probably need to be worked out.
Yeah, but able to work through that, just through that open dialogue with the county there. I think that's a great kind of introduction to the backstory of this whole project. And now I think it'd be great to hop over to Jeremy and kind of talk about the actual decommissioning process. Jeremy, you mind walking us through that?
Yeah, once I was in contact with Reid and Jack, and we were working with the county. They've already talked about some of the permitting issues, but eventually everything worked out okay with the grading permit and everything. So we were there was two turbines that we were going to decommission. They were at the same location, adjacent to one another. The first thing we would do, we came in, locate all the utilities, and then start obtain any other permits besides the grading permit. We had to speak with the federal and the state because we did use explosives, so we had to go to the state fire marshal, get clearance. Then we go to the local EMS because there will be a boom in any time explosives will be used, and we want them to go ahead and get ahead of that, put out a social media statement saying, hey, there will be a boom between such and such time. That way EMS is not flooded with calls. Next, we'd go in, clear the area of any hazards, because there will be torching once the turbine is felled. We don't want any risk of fire. Once everything is ready to go, we had to go, because some of these turbines were still alive, we had to go to the actual substation and do a lockout tag out to ensure that neither one of these turbines were energized in any way. We did choose energetic felling for this project. It's very quick. It's much cheaper than a crane deconstruction. We were running up against the planting season, so we had to get these turbines on the ground, processed and removed, and then come in, remediate the land, ensure that they were able to plant. You have any questions or anything, Jake?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, going back to sort of the method we chose for this, we picked energetic felling. Can you kind of talk about some of the other options? I know you mentioned a few reasons why we chose this option, but kind of give us the pros and cons a little bit about the two or three different methods that you guys use.
Yeah, absolutely. So energetic and cable felling was energetic as explosives, obviously, where you place a controlled detonation, fell the turbine in a specific direction. You can use a cable to achieve this same outcome, but you have to climb the turbine, and you're going to have a piece of heavy machinery pulling a cable, which could be 1 to 2 times or 1.5 to 2 times the height of the turbine out. So in a planting field, you may not want uh, a large excavator or crawler tractor going through a field that they're going to plant. Um, as far as using a crane for a deconstruction, anytime you have a crane and there is any kind of limitations that um, say wind, lightning, or any kind of delay, the crane gets very costly, and it could last for weeks. So we went with the energetic felling. We were in a time crunch, and it just made more sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And so I know when we've talked previously, you mentioned Central Surplus is really busy right now. Can you guys kind of talk about uh, your current workload, what you're seeing, as far as other decommissionings around the country?
Right. There is decommissionings going on all over the country. Right now, we're participating in more than 100 wind turbine generation decommissioning, and we're also all over the country doing these smaller projects. The one to two turbines or three turbines. Um, we're seeing a lot of these, like Jack had said, this was a Chinese company that was on these, and there's parts issues. So older units, you do have issues with getting the parts to repair them. We're also seeing, let's say, even not just the parts, but let's say you want to replace the nacelle, which is the powerhouse at the top of the turbine. It may not bolt up right, or even maybe the foundation doesn't support the new units, or even the blades may not mount right to the rotor anymore. So there's lots of reasons we're seeing decommissionings, and we're seeing them all. It's all over.
Any other through lines, kind of, with the characteristics of projects that make them more likely to be decommissioned?
Mostly, it's the units that's not from a major manufacturer, um, and also the smaller units. Less than 2 megawatt units. We're seeing a lot of those uh, being decommissioned.
Okay, gotcha. And what are those major manufacturers you mentioned?
Well, a few are like Vestas, GE, Siemens Gamesa. There's a 4 or 5 large manufacturers that they're able to retrofit fit parts and have, even for an older unit, they can come in and manufacture their own part to make these things work. But the smaller companies we're seeing, they're not able to adapt like the larger companies are.
Okay, gotcha. And then what's the typical project timeline look like? How many months from start to finish?
Generally, we would say for a single turbine, it could range 1 to 2 weeks. Sometimes it's weather dependent, and there's a lot of moving parts that has to to make a project go smoothly. But once the turbine has failed, it just takes generally a few days to process the turbine itself, all the metal. Then you process the fiberglass. And on this particular project, as Reid said, we had to go 4 foot below grade. So we had to remove all the concrete down 4 feet and then backfill. So this project took, I think we actually maybe 3 weeks on this project. It was two turbines, but it was wet, and we also ran into the frost laws, and we weren't able to get the size equipment that we would normally get.
Okay,
So
good. You mentioned frost laws. Can you kind of briefly explain what those are for the viewers?
yeah, absolutely. So in certain parts of the country, uh, over the winter, the ground is frozen, and it's not an issue. But as it starts to thaw, temperatures start warming up to a certain point, usually in the spring. Then the ground they don't want to damage the roads, so they limit the weight capacity that can travel over the roads. So there's just a brief period where the ground has to adjust, and they have these laws in place to where you can't transport uh, specific weight limits.
Gotcha. Okay, it'd be good to touch on the recycling and repurposing for
Mhm.
the turbines. What all can be recycled, and then what are those used for afterwards?
Okay, so all the metal, the turbine itself, all the tube sections are all it's all steel. It's 100% recyclable. Um, in the top in the nacelle, everything up there it's mostly metal. There's a fiberglass shell, and the blades are fiberglass. So we take those and we send those to a recycling plant. Um, the blades and the nacelle housing, they use those to either fire a kiln for a concrete manufacturer, or they're actually used for to mix in with the concrete as filler. So they're repurposed in a different way, other than just being placed into a landfill.
Gotcha. And then as far as determining how where to drop those turbines, how's that determined?
Well, a lot of it is accessibility. If you have a road that's running parallel to it, we can lay it across, to where you can access it without going further into a crop field. Or there may be underground utilities that we have to work around. There could be a pipeline. If the oil, sometimes the companies with underground utilities are worried about a failing, and especially an energetic failing, because they hear the word explosive and their mind always goes to the worst places. So what we do, we place a seismograph at the base of the turbine, so it monitors the actual explosion and the impact. And so that it's a few different reasons where we determine where to land the actual turbine.
Sure. Yeah, to fully mitigate, any kind of
Right.
incidents that could occur there. Okay. And then, do you collaborate with any of the, local officials for all this?
Yeah, absolutely. Every time, federal, state, and local. On this particular, I talk with probably everybody in Story County on this project. I was really in touch with the EMS, because I really wanted them to ensure that they weren't flooded. It was a small county, and I don't think they were ready for all the news that this was gonna bring. Social media, it spreads like wildfire when
Yeah, I can imagine it's exciting to watch. We put out a video on the turbines falling down and everything like that. And, it's definitely it'll catch your eye.
yeah.
And then, kind of jumping over to some of the land restoration and effects on the actual farm itself. Is there any compaction caused from the
Yeah.
felling?
Yes, there is. You- it's impossible to 100% mitigate that. So what we do, we have to go in, and any kind of debris that is in the impact area, we do clean that out, and we bring in backfill that the landowner chooses. So a lot of times it's local. We try to get the local soil to bring this in to not only the impaction site, but also where the foundation was. We want to fill this back in. So it's not really that large of an impact crater as you would think. It could be 4 feet, 5 feet deep.
Okay, gotcha. And then is there any final review that it goes on after everything's said and done?
Yeah, we go through with all the customers and everybody that's in the process. We like to walk the before we leave. Personally, we like to have everybody have eyes on and okay the project, and we always want to leave the land better than when we arrived. So, and we were really working with this landowner, the farmers there, to make sure that they were ready to go during farming season.
Nice. Well, I think that's all the questions I've got, specifically for you, Jeremy. Um, Now I'd like to, kind of just throw some open-ended questions at you guys. Whoever wants to answer these is more than welcome to. So we kind of touched on it a few times, but any kind of characteristics or certain milestones in a wind project's life cycle that, it's more susceptible to being decommissioned.
Yeah, let me take a crack at that, and we can then talk to Reid and Jeremy. I think from my perspective as kind of the operator, I think as you're getting into that, 10-year life, then you're starting to reach, at least in these vintage turbines, the need to repower those because newer turbines are going to be more efficient, and in some cases could be larger than the 2 megawatt um, installations that we dealt with on this project. I think the other concern that would be out there is, you know, particularly on smaller installations, those operators are not going to have the same access to capital that a larger operators are. There are people out in the marketplace either owning or looking to buy existing operations with the objective of repowering them, but they've kind of got a minimum threshold of 100 megawatts. So if you wanted to use 2 megawatts as the installed uh, turbine rating, then those kind of buyers are not going to be interested in any installation less than, 40 or 50 turbines. So in situations like we had here, where you've got, 11 turbines spread across 5 different locations, those are problematic and higher likelihood that those would need to be decommissioned unless you're able to successfully identify some one-off buyers who may have adjacent properties or have access to the capital.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Anybody else have anything else to add on that point?
Yeah, I guess I'll just add. I think, yeah, to Jack's point, it's probably primarily going to be driven by the need to swap out the turbine itself. Most PPAs, if done correctly, land rights, those should all survive well past kind of the useful life of the turbine. So what's going to go first and need attention first should be the turbine.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Mhm.
So another question. Somebody have something? Okay. Another question here, a major concern for landowners is, that decommissioning bond that we talked about earlier, not getting funded in time and them getting stuck with the bill. What are some ways that you guys think we could sort of mitigate that for landowners?
Well, I don't know if there's any magic bullet, but I think that the advice that I would give to landowners is, you know, work collaboratively with the operator. Trying to understand what their objective is and what their intentions are. And if it appears that the turbines on that landowner's property are candidates for decommissioning, to have some candid conversations about how that's going to get funded. Um, I don't recall from the specifics of our lease agreements, but as you might expect, the lease agreement really is focused on the operator having unfettered access to the property, and there's less emphasis on kind of information sharing. So one kind of guideline that I provide to landowners is in those situations when the operator needs something, whether it's a waiver or consent for something that's covered in the lease agreement, try to use that as an opportunity to engage with the operator and see if you could use that as potential leverage then to get some better information in terms of repowering objectives and decommissioning risks so that you can start then quantifying what that risk is, particularly if you're a landowner who is in the early stages of formulating an exit plan for selling the acreage, so that any buyer is going to want to make sure that the decommissioning risk gets allocated to the seller. And part of your diligence as the seller is understanding the likelihood of decommissioning and then how that gets factored into the valuation of the land, because that lease will then carry with the transfer of the property.
Yeah, and I guess kind of from the developer or the operator's perspective, it's also good to plan ahead for decommissioning and to the extent possible, kind of include related terms in the lease or easement agreement. Anything that you can kind of front end as far as decommissioning, I think can only pay dividends kind of for all parties involved. There's obviously unforeseen circumstances like what we ran into. But to the extent you can, plan for and come to a consensus at the front end, um, regarding decommissioning, I think it just kind of sets up for a smooth decommissioning when it does happen because it will happen.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Another question, a lot of moving parts, a lot of different people involved with a project like this. I mean, what kind of role did sort of that open channel of communication between all parties have an effect on this?
I think it was a critical component of the success because particularly in this case, when the assignee became the operator, um, there's a lot of questions that people had about what is an ABC, what's going to happen to my lease payments. So we made a dedicated effort to um, have an ongoing dialogue with each of the landowners and then visited on multiple occasions with the appropriate county officials to give them some background in terms of what had happened, what the role of the assignee was, how the ABC worked, and what our intention was to honor the obligations that we had inherited through the assignment to make sure that all of the obligations that were embedded in the lease, um, to the best of our ability, would be exercised.
Yeah, and like Jack said, kind of we went on that tour across Iowa, visiting each of the county officials where we had turbines, and I think those face-to-face meetings really paid dividends when we went to sell, and then ultimately when we went to decommission in Story County. I think those relationships and kind of showing that we were acting in good faith and wanted to uh, you know uh, do right with the turbines. I think that really paid off.
And I think from the landowner perspective, um, they embraced the communication because one of the frustrations they shared with us is they never had any good communications with the prior owner, so it often left them frustrated as to what was happening and what the next steps might be.
Yeah, well, now we got about 5 minutes left here. I'd love to jump to some viewer questions, so I'll go ahead and pull a few of those, and anybody feel free to answer these. Are there any decommissioning activities happening in Iowa other than in a bankruptcy or restructuring context that you guys are aware of?
I'm not directly aware, but there's nothing that says a decommissioning can happen outside of a bankruptcy or a restructuring process. I know that there's some larger operations. They're going through the repowering cycle, but because of the structural issues that Jeremy focused on in terms of um, the existing foundations or tower supports not matching up to the new nacelles coming in, that those properties are actually being decommissioned, but that's part of a larger capital campaign to repower everything. But there's nothing that says you have to do a decommissioning within a bankruptcy or restructuring process because it'd be part of the normal life cycle.
And Jeremy,
Yeah,
is your group
yeah,
working on
and
any
there was
projects in
a
Iowa?
Yeah, we had a few that was from storm damage. So the storm damage that came through and damaged multiple turbines in the farm, and it was just too expensive to replace them. So we came in and uh, did the decommission.
Okay, gotcha. And then another question, Jeremy, do you have any specific methods of remediation that you did for the compaction?
Yeah, we came in with we had excavators and we clean out the any area of impaction, and then we bring in the local or pre-existing topsoil, fill it in. We usually coordinate with the farmers and landowners to ensure that it's what they want.
Gotcha. Okay, and then another person asked, uh, going forward, what can the panel say or you guys say about newer turbine models and their lifetime, how long those will last, in your guys' opinion?
Yeah, I'm
Well,
really not close enough to the mechanics of it to give you a educated answer on that.
in my experience, we're seeing around 15 years before they need some kind of serious overhaul, which is replacement parts, blade repair. So it seems to be that's a pretty good number, about 15 years.
Gotcha. And then one more question here. Can you guys give a good cost estimate to, what it costs to decommission one turbine?
Well, generally, um, it, I hate to get into anything that could open myself up to any NDAs with other companies. If Jack may could speak on this project, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess what I could say, Jake, is that the obviously the when we researched this and then spoke to other demolition companies and spoke then to Jeremy, the energetic felling is it's a much less expensive process than the deconstruction alternative because of the access to the crane and the people in the extended time that the crane has to be in the field and the crew has to be in the field. So in this case, the energetic felling was just a better alternative.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I know we couldn't get to everyone's questions here, but to kind of wrap it up, is there anything else you guys want to touch on that you think would be important for people to know?
I think the only thing I would add is just reinforce the idea of um, landowners and operators kind of embracing or collaborating on a discussion as to what the future holds on individual projects, so that people are not surprised and don't get adversarial. Because I think the successful outcomes on any of these decommissionings are when people are working together because they have the same objective in mind. They may just have different seats at the table, but they do want to end up in a position where the turbines are decommissioned and the land is returned to its agricultural state if you get to that decision point.
Yeah, and I would echo that, Jack, and just as far as I mentioned earlier, kind of um, the best practice of including as many kind of decommissioning terms up front in the lease and easement agreement. But kind of, I think it's important that both parties recognize that, over the 15-year lifespan of that turbine, things are going to change. Whether it be new legislation that changes, tax incentives, or new technology. Things are going to change, and just the ability to work together and be flexible. Kind of being able to stand behind or look to the terms in the lease or easement as a default, but recognizing that it's typically in both parties' best interest to to collaborate and work towards kind of a common goal, even if that strays from kind of the initial agreement.
I guess the only other thing that I would say to further Reid's point is that decommissionings are not new, but the experience are going to be new to the landowner who has land where a decommission is taking place. So the communication really needs to be frequent and robust because the landowner then probably has a lot of sleepless nights about all the bad things that can happen. So maintaining that dialogue and helping them understand how the risks that they're worried about are at least broadly addressed in the lease agreement provides some comfort, in the ongoing communications and the trust you can build in a relationship like that is also very helpful.
Great. Jeremy, any final thoughts?
I just kind of the same thing that Jack and Reid had said. We're just communication. We do, as the demolition company, we do communicate directly with the landowners, a lot, and it gives them peace of mind, knowing the plan ahead and what to expect. They do, and we see that a lot. Like I think it was Jack that said that the previous owners they didn't communicate. I see that a lot all over the country, and they're very leery of working with a new company because they're expecting the same the same that they had before. So it's really good to work with these people and keep them informed and in the loop about every aspect of the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys for your time today. I really appreciate your insights, and thank you to all the viewers for joining us. Hope this was educational for you. And if you have any questions that we weren't able to cover, please feel free to reach out. And so, with that, I hope everyone has a good rest of their Thursday.
Everyone.
Thank you.